self-acceptance and self-love. And I had this fear that the people that I love the most in my life, my mom, my dad, my brothers, my sisters, my best friends, my homies that I grew up with in the neighborhood, for lack of a better term, would all withdraw their love from me. And so that's a really scary fear. If you're 17, 18, 19-year-old individual, or it's already hard enough to make that transition into adulthood. And then all of a sudden you have this fear in your mind that if I reveal who I am to people, the people that I love and care about most, that somehow they're going to take away their love from me. And that's real talk. And a lot of LGBT youth struggle with that. And so, you know, getting to a place where we can accept ourselves and live openly requires some steps. And there's some clear benefits to that. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So I know for me, the first step was I told my best friend. And the very first time I admitted who I was and I shared who I was to somebody, it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. Because then all of a sudden, I didn't have to be afraid of people finding out, of people knowing, oh, Mike, well, he's gay, and I didn't have to have that fear anymore. And so all of a sudden I was able to tell my best friend, and that fear was lifted. And that fear of him withdrawing his love and support, because obviously my best friend's straight and he was married and he had a kid, I had this fear that, was he going to stop being my best friend? And thankfully he didn't. And in fact, not only did he not stop being my best friend, but he became an ally. He really stood up for me. He stood up when other friends kind of were pulling away from me. He stepped in and he served as an ally, and he had my back, and I really appreciated that. And so another reason why it's important to live openly is that you help dispel myths and stereotypes. So the LGBT community, there's a lot of stereotypes about what it means, who looks gay, who looks straight. And so the idea is that if you can be yourself and live openly, you begin to start to break down those stereotypes that exist. Also, for me, it was one of the reasons why I decided to come out publicly at my work. So for many of you to know, last year was the first year that I publicly told my students and co-workers that I was gay. And I had kept that to myself because I had this fear that, again, going back to that word fear, that if I told people who I was completely, that I might face some rejection. So I had kept that to myself for 5 years working here at Rio. And I have, for those of you who don't know, I have a daughter. She's 16. She's a sophomore in high school. Me and my partner have been together for 10 years. We raised her. My daughter's mother left when she was 1. So I've had her by myself. And so me and my partner, she has 2 dads, and that's her identity. And she goes to school and she talks about it with her friends. And so for me, I had kept that from my work life separate, and I decided last year to come out because of the ability to maybe my story make it easier for some other younger person's coming out story to be easier. And so I don't know if you remember, about a year and a half ago, People magazine did a cover story of all these kids committing suicide and as a result of being bullied. And I thought, you know what, I need to be who I am and show and speak up for those students that are feeling that so hopeless that the only option they have left on this world is to take their own life. So I decided to share my story with my students because I don't want to ever see any of my students go through that experience or feel that sense of despair. So those were some of the benefits for me of why I decided to live an open life and be who I am and not be afraid to share my story with others. Now, kind of transitioning my message to talking about the path to support. So what can you do as a person, as a straight person, as someone that wants to be an ally for the LGBT community? I think it's really important to recognize you have a lot of power and influence as a straight person in influencing the way other people perceive and treat folks from the LGBT community. So recognizing that you're powerful and that your support is powerful. I think that when you start to think about being an ally and what it means to be an ally, some things that you can do to offer and show your support. First is just being a listener. Being able to be there and in a non-judgmental way if someone's trying to come out and share their experience, to be there and be a listener and show your support that way is very powerful. Also, talking openly about LGBT issues with your other friends and letting them know that you're a supporter. That's a wonderful peer influence that you have to be able to say, you know what, I accept all people and I respect all people, and this is how I express this through my life and through my actions. I think is another powerful tool you can do. Another thing for me I think is really important is that there's a lot of policies out there that discriminate against the LGBT community. And so being able to exercise your power in the voting box and as like when issues like Prop 8 came out, I know that became really divisive. And I remember for the first time, I don't mean to get emotional, but for the first time I saw my mom stand up for me. Because I think for her, she had a lot of shame that was attached to me being gay, so she didn't want to talk about it with her friends, and she didn't want to talk about it with her, with some of my aunts and uncles. And when Prop 8 came out, I saw my mom stand up for me. And she was like, my son deserves to have equal rights. And so I think for me, that's another way that as an ally you can show your support. And then lastly is also making sure that you're aware of the language that you're using every day, and use inclusive language and language that brings people together and doesn't divide people. And what I mean by that is inclusive language is like if you hear jokes, people cracking jokes. I remember when I first started taking over student life, I would hear the word like, oh, that's so gay, get dropped all the time in the student lounge. And I challenged some of my students. I said, well, what do you mean by that? And what do you think when you use that term? I know you're not using it in a discriminatory way, but when you just even use that word that has such a negative connotation, what do you think that does to people who in the room who are gay? What that makes them feel like? And kind of having those conversations and challenging people's thinking about the language that we use, because the language that we use is very powerful. So those are just some thoughts that I thought I would share with you in terms of what it means to live openly and what you could do to be a straight ally and offer your support for the LGBT community. And like I said, for me, my motivation is really, it's about inclusion. You know, when people ask me what does diversity mean, I always say, you know what, diversity for me is about creating space where no one feels that they're excluded from the community for being who they are. Whether that means you're gay or lesbian or straight, whether that means you're Latino or not Latino, whether that means you might have a disability, whether that means you have, you know, you're a female or male, you know, whatever the different types of diversity we represent, that we as a campus community create a community, a village that no one feels excluded or feels like they have to opt out because of who they are. And that's what today's about. And that's what the symbolism about this Unity Walk is, that we believe that all humans have equal worth, that we all have equal worth, and we express that in our campus community. So thank you for being here. Thank you for showing your support. It means, you know, this is one of my proudest moments here at Rio Hondo College, to look out and see so many students really here today and supporting this. So thank you.